The sound of the gavel echoed through the small wooden hall like a thunderclap. "Miss Montgomery, this council has reached its decision," Mayor Hargrove declared. "You are hereby banished from the town of Willow Creek." Olivia Montgomery stood frozen, the words hitting her harder than any blow. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she refused to let them see fear. She was 22 years old, the daughter of the late Dr. Edmund Montgomery, the town's only doctor, and she had inherited both his sharp mind and his unyielding sense of right and wrong. Her green eyes blazed as she met the mayor's gaze. "On what grounds?" she demanded, her voice steady though her knees trembled. "Public disruption, slander against town officials, and moral impropriety." Councilman Phillips read from a paper, avoiding her eyes. A ripple of murmurs swept through the small crowd gathered in the hall. Women whispered behind gloved hands. Men shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Olivia's jaw tightened. She knew the real reason. It wasn't because she'd spoken out of turn. It was because she'd discovered what her father had died trying to expose: corruption in the town council. They were embezzling funds meant for the schoolhouse, using them to build a new saloon instead. Mayor Hargrove's mustache twitched as he leaned forward. "You've forgotten your place, Miss Montgomery. Without your father's protection, I suggest you remember that a woman's virtue lies in her silence." Olivia's chin lifted. "Then I'll gladly be called unvirtuous, sir. Silence is what allows men like you to prosper." Gasps filled the room. The mayor's face turned purple. 2 days, he barked. "You have 2 days to leave Willow Creek. After that, the sheriff will escort you out personally." As she turned and walked toward the doors, the wooden floor creaked under her boots. The same men who had once praised her father's service now looked away. The same women who had smiled at her in church now clutched their shawls tighter. Outside, the afternoon sun was blinding, the main street hazy with dust. Olivia drew in a shaky breath, the taste of injustice bitter on her tongue. She looked down the long stretch of road lined with weather-beaten buildings. The blacksmith, the general store, the post office, and realized she no longer belonged anywhere here. By the time she reached her father's old house at the edge of town, the weight of it all crashed over her. The once cheerful 2-story home felt empty now, the curtains drawn and air still. She stood in the doorway, the smell of books and old wood surrounding her, memories clawing at her heart. Her father's leather chair sat by the window, worn smooth by years of late nights and hard work. She sank into it, clutching the armrests to steady herself. 2 days. They were taking everything: her home, her name, her dignity. Tears threatened, but she blinked them away. Crying wouldn't change anything. If she had to leave Willow Creek, she would do so with her head held high. A knock at the door startled her. When she opened it, Sheriff Taylor stood there, hat in hand. He was a broad-shouldered man in his 40s, his eyes filled with unease. "Miss Montgomery," he began softly, "I came to be sure you understood the council's decision." "That I'm being thrown out of my own home?" she said coldly. "Yes, Sheriff. I understood perfectly." He shifted awkwardly. "Look, Olivia, this isn't personal." "It feels rather personal from where I'm standing." The sheriff sighed, glancing at the dusty road. "I can arrange passage on Friday's eastbound stagecoach. Might be best for you to head toward Denver. Big city might suit a woman like yourself." "A woman like myself?" Quote. He hesitated, one who doesn't know when to hold her tongue. Her eyes narrowed. "Then I'll consider it a compliment." He tipped his hat, clearly uncomfortable, and left her standing in the doorway. That night, Olivia sat at her father's desk, sorting through papers and counting what little money she had. $80, barely enough to start a new life. She packed a few belongings: her mother's locket, her father's medical books, and his worn doctor's bag. She didn't sleep. Her mind churned with anger and fear. At dawn, she was still awake when the sound of hooves thundered up the road. Then came a shout. "Help! Is there a doctor here?" Olivia rushed to the porch. A rider on a palomino horse was galloping toward her house, holding something or someone in his arms. He pulled up hard, dust swirling around him. "Please," he called out, voice rough but urgent. "They said the doctor lived here." "My father was the doctor," she said automatically. "He's gone now." The man's expression fell. The person in his arms, a young woman, let out a weak groan, her dress soaked with blood. "She's been shot," the rider said, dismounting quickly. "Stagecoach robbery, 2 hours north, the nearest doctor's days away." Without another thought, Olivia threw the door wide open. "Bring her inside." The man obeyed instantly, laying the injured woman on the dining table. 3 other riders followed, tense and dusty from the trail. "Name's Jake Callahan," the tall man said as he removed his hat, revealing sun-browned skin and storm-blue eyes. "These are my men. We were escorting the stage when bandits hit." Olivia's focus was already on the wound. "You're lucky the bullet didn't hit an artery," she said, examining the shoulder. "I'll need hot water and bandages." Jake didn't hesitate. "You heard her," he barked to his men. "Get to it!" Minutes later, the room buzzed with activity. Olivia's hands moved with practiced precision as she cleaned the wound and prepared to extract the bullet. "You've done this before," Jake observed quietly as he handed her a cloth. "My father trained me," she said without looking up. "But according to the men of Willow Creek, that makes me dangerous." Jake gave a low chuckle, though his eyes stayed serious. "Dangerous can be useful." The bullet came free with a metallic clink. Olivia cleaned and stitched the wound, her fingers steady despite her exhaustion. Jake followed every instruction without question. Boiling water, holding the patient still, fetching supplies. When it was done, Olivia leaned back, wiping her brow. "She'll live, but she'll need rest." Jake poured water into a cup and handed it to her. "You did good work." Quote, "I did what anyone would have done," she said, accepting the drink. "Not anyone," he countered. "Most would have turned us away." She looked at him then, really looked. Broad shoulders, strong jaw, eyes the color of the Wyoming sky after rain. There was something steady about him, something that made her heartbeat quicken. "What will you do when the council finds out you helped us?" he asked. Olivia's mouth tightened. "They'll add it to the list of my sins, I imagine. But I'm leaving tomorrow anyway." Jake frowned. "Leaving? Why?" "Because I dared to speak the truth," she said bitterly. "And truth makes small men angry." He studied her for a long moment. "That's a damn shame. A woman who can think for herself and patch a bullet wound better than most doctors ought to be celebrated, not run out of town." Olivia gave a humorless laugh. "You'd be the first man I've met who thinks so." Jake's expression softened. "Then maybe you've been meeting the wrong men." Before she could respond, the injured woman stirred on the table. Olivia rushed to her side, checking the bandages. "She'll be all right," she said gently. "She's strong." Jake nodded, relief crossing his face. "Thank you, miss?" "Montgomery, Olivia Montgomery." "Well, Miss Montgomery," he said slowly, "if this town's fool enough to send you away, I might have a proposition for you." She glanced at him warily. "A proposition?" "Not the kind you're thinking," he said quickly, holding up his hands. "I run a ranch about 2 days, ride west, Callahan Ranch. 20 men, maybe more come spring. Accidents happen all the time, and we could use someone with your skills." Olivia blinked. "You're offering me a job?" "Room, board, wages, and your own cabin," he said firmly. "You'd answer to no one but yourself." She hesitated, studying him. "Why me? You don't even know me." Jake smiled faintly. "I know you didn't hesitate to help a stranger. And I know you've got more courage than half the men I've ever met." For the first time in days, Olivia felt something other than despair. Hope. Before she could answer, a heavy knock rattled the door. Sheriff Taylor stepped in, eyes narrowing at the sight of Jake. "Miss Montgomery," the sheriff said stiffly, "just checking that you're preparing to leave tomorrow." Jake stepped forward, his tone cool but firm. "She'll be leaving, all right, under my protection. She's coming to work at Callahan Ranch." The sheriff looked between them. "That so?" "It is," Jake said evenly, "and I'd appreciate it if you or the council had the good sense not to interfere." After a tense silence, the sheriff tipped his hat. Makes no difference to me where she goes so long as she's gone by noon." He turned and left. When the door closed, Olivia met Jake's gaze. "You just took quite a risk." Jake shrugged. "I'm not afraid of bullies." Something in his voice, calm, unshaken, made Olivia believe him. He put his hat back on. "Think about my offer, Miss Montgomery. We ride at sunrise." As he stepped out into the moonlit street, Olivia stood by the door, heart pounding. For the first time since her father's death, she felt a spark of purpose flicker inside her chest. Maybe her story wasn't over after all. Maybe it was just beginning. The first light of dawn crept through the thin curtains of Olivia's bedroom, brushing against her face and waking her from a restless sleep. The room was half empty now, her trunks packed and waiting by the door. Every creak of the old house echoed like a farewell. Outside, the faint clatter of hooves and wagon wheels drew her to the window. Jake Callahan was there, just as he promised. He looked freshly washed and steady as ever, his blue shirt rolled at the sleeves, a hat low over his eyes. His men gathered behind him with their horses. When she opened the door, Jake's smile was small but genuine. "Mornin', Miss Montgomery. Hope you got some rest." "Not much," she admitted. "Too many memories in this house." Jake glanced at the worn porch, the shutters hanging crooked, the wildflowers her father had planted by the steps. "You ready to make new ones?" Olivia nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, I'm ready." Quote. Together they loaded her trunks onto the wagon where Rebecca Miller, the wounded stagecoach passenger, lay resting on a bed of blankets. The young woman was pale but awake, managing a weak smile. "You're coming with us, then?" "I am," Olivia said softly. "Looks like we're both leaving Willow Creek behind." As they finished packing, curious faces began appearing at windows and doors. Some townsfolk watched in silence. Others whispered. Mrs. Parker, the baker's wife, hurried across the street with a basket in her hands. "Bread and preserves for your journey," she said kindly, pressing it into Olivia's arms. "I'm sorry for how things turned out, dear. Your father would be proud of you." "Thank you, Mrs. Parker." Olivia's voice wavered. "You've been one of the few kind ones." Before she could say more, Mayor Hargrove and Sheriff Taylor stepped onto the boardwalk outside the town hall. The mayor's smug face twisted into a smirk as he called out, "Leaving us already, Miss Montgomery? You might find the world less forgiving than we've been." Jake's head turned sharply. His hand rested on the wagon rail, knuckles white. "Careful, Mayor," he said evenly. "I've got no patience for men who mock women they've wronged." Hargrove's grin faltered. The sheriff shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. Olivia climbed onto the wagon seat beside Jake. "Let's go," she said quietly. Jake flicked the reins, and the wagon lurched forward. As they rolled past the edge of town, Olivia looked back one last time at the place that had been her entire world, and now was nothing but dust and pain. "Having second thoughts?" Jake asked softly. "No," she said, turning forward. "Just saying goodbye." The journey west stretched across open prairie and low, rolling hills. The air smelled of sage and sun. By evening, they made camp near a creek that shimmered under the fading light. Jake's men set up a small fire, the smell of coffee and beans filling the air. Olivia tended to Rebecca, checking her wound and replacing the bandage. "Healing well," she said, satisfied. "You'll be up and walking before long." Rebecca smiled faintly. "You're a miracle worker." Quote. Olivia shook her head. "Just stubborn enough not to give up." Jake approached, carrying 2 tin cups of coffee. "You should rest too," he said, handing one to Olivia. She accepted it with a nod. "I'm used to long nights." He crouched beside her, the firelight catching the strong lines of his face. Still, no one can run on determination alone. For a moment, their eyes met, hers tired but fierce, his calm and steady. The silence stretched between them, warm and unspoken. After Rebecca drifted off to sleep, Jake motioned toward the fire. "Come, sit with us a bit, safer by the light." Olivia joined him and the others. The men quieted when she sat, unsure what to say in the presence of a woman, especially one who had stitched up their friend like a seasoned surgeon. Tom Reeves, Jake's foreman, finally cleared his throat. Boss says you're coming to work at the ranch." "That's right," Olivia said, meeting his gaze. "Never had a lady doctor before." "Then, it's about time you did." A few of the men chuckled, the tension easing. Jake grinned faintly. "Told you she was tough." Quote. They ate in companionable silence for a while. The stars overhead were so bright they looked close enough to touch. Olivia tilted her face upward, breathing in the cool night air. "You miss your father," Jake said, quietly beside her. "I do," she admitted. "He taught me everything I know. Not just medicine, how to stand up for myself, how to see truth when others hide it." Jake nodded thoughtfully. "Sounds like he raised you right. My folks were like that too. Ma never kept her opinions quiet. My pa loved her for it." Olivia smiled faintly. "Then you're rare, Mr. Callahan." "Jake," he corrected gently. "You can say whatever you want with me, remember?" Her heart gave a small, unexpected flutter at his words. The next 2 days passed peacefully. Rebecca grew stronger, and Olivia found herself talking more with Jake during their rides. He asked about her father's work, her studies, her views on medicine and education. She asked about the ranch, his men, his plans. He listened, really listened, in a way that felt foreign and comforting all at once. By the third afternoon, the land began to change. The plains rolled into hills dotted with pine trees. Ahead, mountains rose blue and distant against the horizon. Jake pointed to the valley below. "That's Callahan Ranch." Olivia gasped softly. The sprawling property stretched wide. A main house of stone and timber surrounded by corrals, a barn, and smaller cabins scattered nearby. Cattle dotted the fields like tiny moving shadows. "It's beautiful," she said. Jake's eyes softened. Took years to build it up. Still a lot to do. But it's home. When they rolled into the yard, workers paused to watch. A sturdy woman with silver-threaded hair came out from the main house, wiping her hands on her apron. "Martha," Jake called. "Meet Miss Olivia Montgomery, our new medical practitioner." Martha's eyebrows lifted slightly, though her tone was warm. "Well, now, that's a fine surprise. We've needed someone who knows what they're doing. You'll find no shortage of scraped hands and foolish accidents here." Olivia smiled, instantly liking her. "I'll do what I can." Quote. Martha looked between Olivia and Jake, a knowing glint in her eyes. "You'll be staying in the old foreman's cabin. I'll send over fresh linens and water." Jake nodded. "Thank you, Martha. I'll help her get settled." He led Olivia across the yard to a small log cabin nestled near a grove of aspens. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, a bed and small table neatly arranged. "It's not fancy," Jake said, setting her bags down. "But it's warm, sturdy, and yours to do with as you please." Olivia turned slowly, taking it in. After everything she'd lost, the sight of a space she could finally call her own filled her chest with something she hadn't felt in months. Peace. "It's perfect," she said softly. Jake smiled. "Good. Then welcome home, Olivia." The sound of her name on his lips stirred something deep inside her. He lit the fire for her before stepping back toward the door. "I'll come by in the morning, show you around proper." Quote. As the door closed behind him, Olivia stood by the crackling fire, her hands trembling slightly. Not from fear this time, but from a cautious, fragile hope. Outside, the ranch lights flickered like stars. Inside, she unpacked her father's worn doctor's bag, setting his instruments and books on the small table by the hearth. His legacy lived here now, in this cabin, in her hands. She sank into the rocking chair, staring into the fire. For the first time since her banishment, the ache in her chest eased. Maybe, just maybe, this place could be her new beginning. And maybe the man who had brought her here was part of it. The following weeks brought a calm Olivia hadn't known in months. Each morning, sunlight streamed through her cabin window, and the sound of horses and hammering filled the air. Life at Callahan Ranch ran on rhythm: breakfast at dawn, work until sundown, and laughter by the fire when the day was done. Olivia quickly became part of that rhythm. She turned the corner of her cabin into a small clinic, her father's old instruments lying neatly beside jars of herbs and bandages. The ranch hands were shy at first, reluctant to seek treatment from a woman, but one by one they came. It started when Tom Reeves, the foreman, got a nasty splinter in his palm. "Don't you dare fuss, just pull it," he'd grumbled. Olivia cleaned the wound, plucked the splinter out, and bandaged him up so quickly he blinked in surprise. "Guess you know what you're doing," he muttered. "Better than you know how to keep your hands out of trouble," she teased. Word spread fast after that. The men began stopping by with sprained wrists, feverish forearms, and once even a bruised pride when young Billy fell off his horse. Olivia treated them all with calm authority and quiet humor. Jake watched it happen from a distance at first. He'd always known she was strong, but watching her win over his men one by one stirred something deeper than admiration. One morning he found her outside her cabin, sleeves rolled up, grinding dried leaves in a small mortar. "What's that you're brewing, Doc?" he asked, leaning against the porch rail. "Comfrey," she said, smiling faintly. "It helps with swelling. I thought I'd stock up before winter." Jake smiled back. "You're making this place better every day." Olivia looked up at him, her auburn hair catching the morning light. "And you've made it possible for me to do so." There was something unspoken in the air between them. Jake felt it every time she smiled, every time she called him Jake instead of Mr. Callahan. One afternoon, while she was checking supplies, young Billy came running. "Miss Montgomery, Boss got thrown off his horse out by the east pasture." Olivia's heart lurched. How bad? Quote, "Tom says his leg's all twisted, and he's bleeding bad." She grabbed her medical bag and mounted her mare, Daisy, riding hard across the fields. Dust rose behind her as she reached the pasture, where several men knelt around Jake. He sat propped against a fallen log, his face pale, jaw clenched. "About time someone fetched the doctor," he said through gritted teeth, "though I told them it wasn't necessary." "I'll be the judge of that," Olivia said, kneeling beside him. His right thigh was torn by a jagged branch, blood seeping through his jeans. She cut the fabric carefully, ignoring his protests, and cleaned the wound with water. "You'll need stitches," she said firmly, "and you've likely sprained your ankle. No riding for a week." "A week?" he groaned. "We're moving cattle to summer pasture." "Then you'll learn to give orders from a chair," she interrupted, voice brisk but gentle. Tom Reeves smirked. "She's got you there, boss." With the men's help, Olivia got him back to the main house. Inside, she set up her instruments on his bedside table. "Hold still," she warned, threading a needle. "Do I have a choice?" he asked, wincing as she cleaned the wound. "Not really." He smiled faintly through the pain. "You're not afraid of me, are you, Olivia?" She didn't look up. "You don't strike me as someone to be afraid of." When she finished stitching, she met his gaze. His blue eyes held warmth and something else that made her heartbeat stumble. "You've got a steady hand," he murmured. "Years of practice," she replied, flustered. "And a stubborn patient." Jake chuckled, even as exhaustion pulled at him. "You've got a stubborn streak yourself." Over the next several days, Olivia visited his room often to check his bandages. Their conversations stretched longer each time, about books, childhood memories, the war he'd fought in, and her father's dreams for women's education. On the fourth night, thunder rolled across the valley as a storm broke. Rain lashed against the windows, and lightning flashed, illuminating the room where Jake sat propped in bed, reading by lamplight. Olivia arrived, soaked from checking the stables. "You'll catch cold walking in that," he scolded softly. "I couldn't sleep," she said, "and the horses were restless." He gestured to the chair by his bed. "Then stay a while." The fire crackled as they talked, about loss, hope, and the strange roads that led them both to this ranch. "I never planned to be a rancher," Jake said quietly, staring at the flames. "I was studying law before the war. Thought I'd be a lawyer in Pennsylvania. But after everything I saw, open sky and honest work seemed the only way to start over." "Do you regret it?" Olivia asked. He shook his head. "Not anymore, especially not since you came along." Her breath caught. She tried to look away, but he reached out, his hand warm against hers. "You've changed this place, Olivia. You've changed me." Before she could respond, thunder rumbled again, and the storm's light flickered over their faces. Something in his eyes made her heart pound. "Jake," she whispered, but he only smiled gently. "With me," he said softly, "you can say whatever you want." She smiled, a tear escaping before she could stop it. "Then, I'll say this. I've never felt more at home than I do here." He squeezed her hand, his voice low. "Then stay, for good." The days that followed only deepened what was already growing between them. Jake recovered, and by late summer he was back on his horse, though he still walked with a slight limp. They worked side by side, she tending the men, he overseeing the cattle, and every evening they ended up on her porch, sharing stories as the sky burned orange. By the time the leaves began to turn gold, neither could hide their feelings any longer. One evening, Jake asked her to ride with him to the ridge above the ranch. The sun was setting, painting the valley in warm light. He spread a blanket on the rock and pulled a small box from his pocket. "Olivia Montgomery," he said, voice steady but soft. "You were banished from one town for speaking your mind, but here, you taught me how to listen. I can't imagine this ranch or my life without you. Will you marry me?" For a moment, Olivia couldn't breathe. Then she smiled through tears. "Yes, Jake." 1,000 times, yes. He slipped the simple gold ring onto her finger and kissed her, slow and certain, the wind carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers around them. Months later, the ranch came alive with celebration. Their wedding was held under the open sky, with lanterns strung between trees and music spilling from a fiddle. The men who once doubted her cheered the loudest. Martha cried as she adjusted Olivia's veil. When the minister said, "You may kiss the bride," Jake pulled her close, whispering, "Welcome home, Mrs. Callahan." Years passed, but that promise never faded. Together, they built the ranch into one of the most respected in Wyoming. Olivia opened her own clinic in a converted barn, treating settlers from miles around. Jake built her the schoolhouse she'd always dreamed of, where she taught children in the mornings and healed the wounded by night. People began to say that Callahan Ranch was where a man could work hard, a child could learn, and a woman could speak her mind freely. And whenever someone asked Jake what made his ranch thrive, he always smiled and said, "It's simple. I married the bravest woman I ever met, and I let her talk." Because in a world that had once silenced her, Olivia had finally found her voice, her purpose, and her forever home. And every time she looked at Jake, she knew he had kept his promise. She could say whatever she wanted because she had found the one man who would always listen.